Something unprecedented is happening right now in the global energy markets, and if you are not paying attention, you are going to miss one of the most consequential shifts in geopolitical history since the Gulf War. Oil has crossed the $100 threshold. Not because of a pipeline malfunction, not because of a seasonal demand surge, but because the Middle East has once again become the epicenter of a conflict that the entire world was hoping to avoid. Iran is at the center of it. The Strait of Hormuz is under threat, and the ripple effects are already moving through every economy on the planet like a slow-moving earthquake. This is not a drill. This is not a simulation. What is unfolding right now has the potential to reshape the global energy order, destabilize fragile economies, and force world powers into decisions they have been putting off for years. Stay with me through this entire video, because by the end, you will understand not just what is happening, but why it matters to every single person on this planet, including you. To understand the full weight of this moment, we need to go back a few weeks and trace exactly how we arrived here. Tensions between Iran and its regional adversaries, particularly Israel and the United States, had been simmering for months. Proxy conflicts in Yemen, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon had been escalating steadily, and the back-channel diplomatic communications that usually prevent full-scale confrontations had reportedly broken down. Then came a series of events that analysts are now describing as the trigger sequence. Iranian-backed forces launched a coordinated strike against strategic infrastructure in the region. The response from opposing military forces was swift and severe, and within 72 hours, what had been a managed proxy conflict suddenly transformed into something far more direct and far more dangerous. Before we go further, if you are finding this analysis valuable, take 2 seconds and hit that like button and subscribe to War Alert 24. We cover these developing situations in real time with the depth and clarity that you will not find in mainstream coverage. Now back to what is unfolding. The moment direct military engagement became visible on satellite imagery and was confirmed by multiple international defense agencies, oil markets reacted with a speed and ferocity that caught even veteran commodity traders off guard. Brent crude, which had been trading in the mid-80s for most of the year, spiked past $90 within hours. By the time the trading day closed in London, it had broken through $100 per barrel for the first time in several years. West Texas Intermediate followed within the same trading session. The reason for this reaction is not panic. It is pure strategic logic, and understanding that logic tells us everything about why this conflict is so dangerous. Iran sits at the edge of the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical choke points in the entire global energy system. Every single day, approximately 20% of all the world's traded oil passes through that narrow body of water. That includes the oil that heats homes in Europe, powers factories in Asia, and fuels the American transportation network. When any serious military conflict emerges in that region, the markets immediately begin pricing in the risk that those shipments could be disrupted, delayed, or in a worst-case scenario, halted entirely. And when Iran itself is a party to that conflict, that risk multiplies dramatically. Iran has the capability, the geography, and the historical willingness to threaten Hormuz. They have done it before as a negotiating tool. Now, with direct conflict underway, the question is whether that threat becomes action. What makes this particular escalation different from previous episodes of tension in the region is the degree to which multiple major powers are now either directly involved or are being forced to choose sides openly. In past crises, the United States, Russia, China, and European powers could maintain a degree of strategic ambiguity. They could express concern, call for de-escalation, and continue operating normally behind the scenes. That window of ambiguity is closing fast. American naval assets have repositioned into the region, which is a significant signal of intent. Russian diplomatic channels have reportedly been activated to communicate directly with Tehran. China, which is one of the largest buyers of Iranian oil and has enormous economic exposure to Middle Eastern stability, is watching with visible concern. When the major powers stop being background observers and start becoming active participants or pressure points, the conflict dynamic changes entirely. From a military strategy perspective, what is most significant about this escalation is not just the immediate fighting, it is what each side is signaling about its willingness to absorb costs. Iran's leadership has, for decades, built its entire regional strategy around the concept of asymmetric deterrence. The idea is that even a militarily weaker actor can impose unacceptable costs on a stronger adversary by targeting economic pressure points, using proxy forces, and threatening global infrastructure. Oil is the ultimate pressure point in that strategy. If Iran can credibly threaten $100 oil or $120 oil, it gains enormous leverage, not just over Israel or the United States, but over every government in the world that is dealing with inflation, energy poverty, and economic instability. That is a powerful card to hold. On the other side of this equation, Israel and the United States face their own set of strategic calculations. Neither can allow Iran to succeed in using energy markets as a geopolitical weapon without suffering serious credibility damage. If the world sees that attacking infrastructure and threatening Hormuz successfully changes the behavior of Western powers and their allies, then every other regional actor with grievances and ambitions will take note. The precedent would be deeply destabilizing, so there is enormous pressure on the Western coalition to respond in a way that reestablishes deterrence without triggering a full-scale regional war. Threading that needle is extraordinarily difficult, and history suggests that these situations rarely resolve exactly as planned. The economic consequences of what is happening right now are already becoming visible and will intensify significantly in the weeks ahead. Airline stocks dropped sharply in the first trading session after oil crossed $100 because aviation fuel is one of the most direct costs that airlines face, and they cannot easily pass those costs on to consumers quickly. Shipping companies that operate tankers are experiencing a complicated dynamic. Higher oil prices mean higher freight rates in the short term, but if Hormuz access becomes genuinely threatened, the risk premium on every voyage through that region becomes enormous. Refineries in Europe and Asia are quietly beginning to assess their strategic reserves and calculate how many weeks of supply they can maintain if normal import flows are disrupted. These are the kinds of quiet, precautionary moves that rarely make headlines but signal just how seriously institutional actors are taking this situation. For average households, particularly in the United States and Europe, the impact will be felt most immediately at the gas pump. A sustained oil price above $100 typically translates into retail fuel prices that put real pressure on family budgets, particularly in countries where driving is a necessity rather than a choice. Central banks that have been making progress on inflation over the past 2 years are now facing the prospect of a new energy-driven inflation spike that is almost entirely outside their control. Interest rate policy cannot fix a supply shock. It can only manage the demand side of the equation. And in a situation where the energy price increase is being driven by geopolitical risk rather than demand growth, that creates a genuinely difficult policy environment. Some economists are already beginning to use the word stagflation quietly, and that is a word that no policymaker wants to hear. Looking at the longer arc of history, what is happening right now fits into a pattern that we have seen before, but with some critically important new variables. The 1973 oil embargo, the 1979 Iranian Revolution, the 1990 Gulf War, and the 2003 invasion of Iraq all produced significant energy shocks that reshaped the global economy and altered political landscapes around the world. Each of those crises eventually resolved, and global energy systems adapted over time. But each one also left lasting structural changes in how the world thinks about energy security, military alliances, and the relationship between oil and geopolitical power. This moment has the potential to be another of those inflection points. What is different this time is the degree to which the global energy system is already in transition. The shift toward renewable energy, electric vehicles, and reduced dependence on Middle Eastern oil has been accelerating, but that transition is incomplete, and the countries that are furthest along in that transition are actually more insulated from what is happening right now than those that are still deeply dependent on petroleum imports. For developing economies in Africa, South Asia, and Southeast Asia, a sustained oil price above $100 is not just an inconvenience. It is potentially a genuine humanitarian and economic crisis because energy costs affect everything from food prices to electricity availability to the basic functioning of hospitals and water systems. The scenario that most serious analysts are watching most closely right now is not a direct military confrontation between major powers. It is a prolonged period of elevated uncertainty that keeps oil prices high, disrupts shipping patterns, forces realignments in energy supply chains, and gradually shifts the balance of economic and political power in ways that are difficult to predict but impossible to ignore. Prolonged conflicts in the Middle East have historically produced exactly this kind of slow-motion strategic transformation, and there is every reason to believe that the current situation will follow a similar trajectory, even if the immediate military dimensions are eventually contained. The diplomatic dimension of this crisis is moving on multiple tracks simultaneously, and that complexity is itself part of what makes resolution so difficult to achieve quickly. United Nations emergency sessions have been called. Back-channel communications are reportedly active through intermediaries in Oman, Qatar, and Turkey. The European Union is engaged through its own diplomatic framework, but all of these processes take time, and markets and military commanders do not always have the patience to wait for diplomacy to work. The danger in this particular moment is that a miscalculation, a strike that goes further than intended, a naval incident in Hormuz, or a retaliatory attack that kills the wrong people at the wrong time could escalate the situation faster than diplomacy can contain it. What happens in the next 2 to 4 weeks will be critical. If some form of de-escalation framework can be established, even an informal and fragile one, oil prices may begin to recede from the $100 level as risk premiums ease. If, on the other hand, the conflict intensifies, if Iranian naval forces move more aggressively in Hormuz, if additional regional actors become directly involved, or if any of the major powers feels that its core interests are threatened enough to escalate its own involvement, then the scenarios that we are looking at become significantly more severe. Analysts who track these situations professionally are not ruling out the possibility of oil reaching $120 or even $130 in a scenario of extended and escalating conflict. That level of price shock, sustained for several months, would be genuinely transformative in its global economic impact. What we are witnessing right now is not simply a Middle Eastern conflict that will eventually fade from the headlines. It is a stress test for the entire architecture of global energy security, international diplomacy, and the balance of power between competing visions of how the world should be ordered. The outcome of that stress test will shape not just oil prices for the rest of this year, but the strategic environment for years and potentially decades to come. Every government in the world is watching, every energy company is watching, every central bank is watching, and now you are watching too, which means you understand something that most people around you probably do not yet fully appreciate. This matters. All of it matters. And the window to understand it clearly, before the full consequences become visible, is right now. If this analysis gave you a deeper understanding of the situation, please share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think we are heading toward a full-scale regional war? Do you think diplomacy can still pull this back from the edge? Or do you believe the energy shock is just the beginning of something even larger? Your perspective matters, and this community is at its best when we think through these situations together. Share this video, leave your comment, and stay with War Alert 24, because this story is far from over, and we will be here every step of the way to make sure you understand exactly what is happening and why it matters. Sonnet 4.6 Extended Claude is AI a